Hello and welcome to REMORANDOM, a podcast about everything interesting. Today, Claudia and I will be joined by a special guest. His name is James De Vries. James has lots of experience in the strategy and design of editorial products across the spectrum of media. He was also a very early design collaborator for Remo, and his name is still attached to many of our most iconic designs. He'll probably tell you about that. James did a whole bunch of work here in Australia and in Asia before joining Harvard Business Review as its creative director for 7 years, from 2011 to 2017. And on coming back to Australia in 2018, he worked for a bunch of strategy and innovation consultancies, including Second Road, an Accenture company. And now he's kind of back doing his own thing. He'll also probably tell you about that. He's also an adjunct design professor at UTS and a graduate of its visual communication program. So I'm Remo T T.
I'm Claudia Chanshaw.
And welcome, James De Vries. You're on.
Well, great to be here. Terrific to be surrounded by curious and gigantic brains.
with gigantic heads.
Yeah. Speak for yourself.
Whoa. Oh, so this is a new format for us, James. You know, usually it's me banging on with Claudia or me banging on with someone else. But
so I'm the third wheel, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you're the three-nager. But you've got such a long history with the REMORANDOM brand de facto and Remo. You've also had such a lot of experience in I guess you'd call it the design of systems. And so I wanted to hand it over to you to begin with, and then we'll interrupt and interject with questions along the way. We can do a little bit of reminiscing about Operation Design Storm, inter alia, the 1991 mother of all creative sessions in Darlinghurst that yielded all manner of designs. I'll probably throw some of those up on the in the edit. And also, fun fact, you studied with Claudia. You're you used to do so you can
we're fresh graduates together.
What was the right. We're still fresh.
What was the program that you both did? Was it visual
communication? And in those days it was Sydney College of the Arts, and then they decided to kill off that structure of tertiary education, and Sydney College of the Arts became the design school, which went to UTS, and the art school, which went to Sydney University.
Right. Got it.
But we were in the design days, and we were distinct from the visual arts side because we were clean and their desks were dirty and paint spattered, weren't they, James?
Absolutely. We didn't have to wear smocks. We just had to wear black skivvies.
Which didn't mean that we did drool, though.
Beret wearing
exactly in White Bay, which is now a very hip place.
And in those days, your sort of postgraduate, your brand was Deluxe Associates, wasn't it? That's
right. But that happened after I'd worked for a few years, and very early on, I don't know if you remember this, you were launching the store and you had an association or publicity coming through Follow Me magazine where I was working. And at the same time, I was also doing illustration, and I used to make rubber stamps. And my first contact with you was, can I sell my rubber stamps in your new store?
Oh, that's right. And that's where the Swear Bubble design came from, because it was one of your rubber stamps.
And the Idea Light Globe and different things like that all started off their life as rubber stamps in the days before electricity.
I'm also remembering in those days, we ran a weekly black and white print ad in Sydney Morning Herald Spectrum. And you would do the sort of Wall Street Journal-esque illustrations of the products, right?
For
those. That was a weekly deadline that I still remember.
Yeah, you were a multimedia guru even then, And no, it was fantastic. And the unique thing, which is the continuous thread that you've brought through, is curiosity with odd things. And obviously Claudia, you're a maestro at this as well. It's this
collector of odd, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thread, and that's why REMORANDOM, I think, has got such a great life, because there's oddities. I think of the REMORANDOM series as the modern Cole's Funny Picture Book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was intended. But love to get, dozens and dozens of reprints and be.
And here's another thread. If you recall the cover of the Cole's Funny Picture Books, there was a rainbow
I know.
on the cover. And the Remo books are in a rainbow of colors to create the series.
And that was not my idea. That was the printer's idea, because I was just kind of going for, gorgeous colors that I liked. And the Hong Kong-based printer, coincidentally, who would have worked at probably the South China Morning Post, he was the one who suggested, well, if you start with red, maybe the next one should be orange, and, so on and so forth. Anyway, we've run out of rainbow. And as you know, James, on a parallel channel with you, I'm sort of trying to brainstorm what life is like after the rainbow. And we're not going to talk about that today, but that's a sort of thing that has me staring into my Weet-Bix.
Yeah, it's terrible to be successful enough to keep doing different versions. I mean, this is absolutely what happened when I was at Harvard Business Review, when we were publishing books around particular topics. We would set them up, and the idea was, okay, this will be a series of maybe 8. And so you can divide a spectrum, so you've got differentiation there. But once they become successful and they keep making money, you got to keep coming up with slicing those colors finer and finer and finer.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at my boxed sets at the moment in the back of behind me there, and exposure to the sun also makes a difference to the color, So you've got to keep all your REMORANDOMs in total darkness.
Well, yeah, I was wondering about that actually. Is there some UV protection that the printer can apply to?
There are UV varnishes. There's also plastic coating, which makes them environmentally disastrous. But hey, for the price of the curiosity, it's got to be worth it. Yeah.
So, but before we get into Harvard, you were at the Sydney Morning Herald and Financial Review, and you did a lot of newspaper design.
So we had, when I started Deluxe and Associates, I had worked at Follow Me magazine, and I'd also worked doing designs for corporate work, like annual reports. And in those days, that was the high point of a company's expression of who they were, and they would spend lavish amounts of money on them. And so when we started the company, I had this understanding of corporate intent, and a lot of designers didn't in those days. And so the first big project we got as a company was setting up the Financial Review color magazine, which was massively successful for them because they had this gold-plated audience and pent-up demand for advertising. And so that worked really well, and that began a really long relationship designing magazines and newspapers, initially with Fairfax. And those were also the days when they were making more money than they could poke a stick at.
Rivers of gold, they used to call the classifieds, right?
Rivers of gold.
James, when you're tasked with something like redesign a heritage brand like the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age, how do you approach that? Because you've got to be careful messing with the things that we love. How do you approach that, and how do you what's wrong with it, and how do you fix it without stepping over the line?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I think a lot of what we've done has been about retaining heritage value and also revolutionizing them at the same time, because technology changes, audiences change. And I think what we do is try and really understand the spirit or the brand of the organization and think of who they need to appeal to as well. For example, it's often a very simple brief, and the brief we had to redesign the Sydney Morning Herald was the same as the brief we had for the Harvard Business Review, which was, I want it to look more modern, but without ruining everything. And with the Harvard Business Review, the big thing which people thought defined the brand was having the table of contents on the front page, and that was the authority, and it was the editor-in-chief's idea to get rid of it because he was from a magazine background, and we were able to keep the attitude and, well, actually modernize the attitude, but take advantage of what technology allowed and start to really orient towards the audience. The same thing with newspapers. You're designing a system to help the journalists tell better stories. So you're sort of building all the blocks for that. And, with the Herald, it was more consistent layout, more photography, more graphics. And so building tools for all those things. So there's a lot of common elements in doing that. But there's also the really creative spark you need to bring into it. You can't just do it. Certainly not an AI-able thing, I reckon. It's something that you need to get a feeling for it. And then, we would propose 3 or 4 different approaches and they'd have a completely different look and feel. And so you're iterating that all the time and making arguments for why you think something will work better than something else. And we, of course, were very, very much about visual orientation, trying to make things more successful visually, as well as improving the typography. And type is that amazing sort of secret ingredient for a brand where it becomes a defining factor of what you're doing, and it becomes something which people associate with the brand. So if you do that well, it's your secret power, I think.
Well, we had Bob Mankoff on this podcast recently, and the New Yorker surely is a really great example of that sort of heritage maintained, but then modernizing in parallel to that, more with a digital product than the print product. I still find it quaint, having watched their 100-year anniversary documentary on Netflix. I find it quaint that they are so hung up about that guy with the top hat that was on the first.
Yeah.
That they have to kind of keep paying homage to that, feeling that that's so importantly part of their DNA that they can't ditch him. But certainly the typeface, what is it, Caslon, or I don't know.
I'm not sure.
And their weird punctuation stuff, like the umlaut over the second O and the...
That's...
James, you mentioned how important typography is. How does that work for us today? Say you open your phone in the morning and you're looking at stories from The Guardian, and you're looking at, the first thing you see is not a great image, where a magazine would capture you with a fantastic image. You see a clever headline that makes you click through, and all of the type is generic. There is no typography when we're looking on our screens. So how do we go bring that into a digital world?
I think it's there's a tough question, because there's an arm wrestle going on with all those providers, and then the Apples of the world. Apple wants to kind of shroud everything through their closed door system. But, when I look at things on Instagram of news stories and so on, I can tell immediately for a few brands where it's come from. It could be from The Atlantic or New York Magazine, or it could be from The Guardian. The Guardian has very distinctive type, and that was a huge part of their big redesign 20 years ago or so, was updating and designing their own custom typeface called Guardian Egyptian. And so, I think it's really important for the organizations to try and do whatever they can to retain that. If you have to genericize all the type, I'm very skeptical about the dominance of UX as sort of the discipline for digital, because I think it does strip away personality, and we should not be afraid of a bit of personality. And that more than makes up for, 1% fewer clicks on a headline, I think.
Well, is it actually true though that you don't see typography on a phone? I seem to recall that New Yorker articles and stuff still have the.
New Yorker looks like the New Yorker, but when I open my news feed in the morning and at say the Guardian, it's
Right.
just the same type all the way through.
Mm,
And
Yeah.
it's the headline that captures me. There is no sexy image.
yeah.
Well, that goes to another interesting thing. If I'm looking at Apple News, it all comes through as the same sans serif. But if I go
right.
to the branded news feed, it comes through
Okay.
as their brand. But it also gives you the idea that the attitude of the headlines and the way the headlines are written makes a massive difference too. And it used to
Certainly.
be the high point of headline craft used to be the Sun in England. It was, you can argue
yeah,
about the quality of the
totally.
paper, but very, very smart headline writers, which
What do you mean?
defined it.
Headless man finds topless girl.
Exactly.
No, that was the New York Post. That was the New York-
Same set of disciplines. So the equivalent now,
Clickbait.
which I deeply resent, is the clickbait headlines that even the storied brands now, because they're measured on click-through, they don't tell you what you need to know in a headline. You have to click through and
Yep.
decide whether you've been ripped off or not with that headline.
Yeah.
I'm old-fashioned that way.
Celebrity caught with pants down. We don't know whose pants were down. You've got to click.
Yeah.
I'm a creature of habit when it's typography. If you will remember, James, there were the Remo New Baskerville days. And
Absolutely.
New Baskerville was around for a long time, but then I kind of wanted to shed myself of all that ornamentation and I wanted to go sans serif.
You're so
Happened
modern.
to be at the same time that I met Eric Spiekerman at a TED conference. And so his meta became, the new corporate. There was an architect here in Sydney, Simeon King, who was very disappointed because he loved New Baskerville. And
Yes.
he still sends me the odd email yearning for the New Baskerville.
Well, I'll tell him to watch this because he's got a note. That's good.
Funny thing though, I recently for Remorandum we did a chapter on Eric Spiekerman. It's going to be in number 6, which is dropping in May, and I've been using Meta, and Remorandum since day one. And he said that he's done a new sans serif. I can't even remember what it's called, but I just couldn't imagine, resetting the whole book in this like new thing. Maybe
Let's give it a try.
Oh.
The whole thing is that, we tend to think of typography as being this old tradition, but it's a really, really vigorous profession now. And there's more and more international businesses that are developing typefaces. Some of them are brilliant and some of them are really fine reworkings of the classics like Baskerville. And what that means is there's a whole lot of options for differentiation that brands can now avail themselves of and use that as a defining tool. So I love it. And I think it's one of the key steps in any big system design is getting the type right. And it's funny because Meta is now 40 years old. It's a traditional heritage
absolutely.
typeface. So
It used to be the new Helvetica. Now it's now it's old itself. And I read recently there's a new kind of Comic Sans version. I can't remember what it's called. New Sans or something. And it randomizes there's various versions of each letter. And depending on the context, it will like put in that version of the A or that version of the B. So there's a bit of playfulness there.
So I remember having a conversation with Jonathan Heffler of Heffler Type many years ago, and he said what started off for him as a profession of drawing shapes is now pretty much a software business. And it's all about having those options for different languages and the computer power to do variable widths and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, my big recommendation to all readers is look at the type and think about the differentiation.
Okay, I've been looking this up. this font is the new Comic Sans, so love it or hate it. So we've already put the boot in on Comic Sans for
The
Memorandum,
maligned Comic
so we
Sans.
might need to
Oh.
revise that. But,
A whole new boot, the other boot.
So we're talking about boots and rebooting. You, James, in your career would have been told we want to appeal to a younger generation. How do we capture the younger generation? And if you're doing it through a screen, how do you do that?
Yeah. I wish I knew the answer to that. It's really about understanding the currency for that generation. I can remember when we started working with the Sydney Morning Herald, there was, we've got to appeal to younger people. So they would get old journalists to write about young people's language. Here's what the kids are doing these days. That's not going to appeal to them. You need to hand over control to a younger
to these young
group.
people.
Yeah. And, with my kids who are now all adult, the level of sophistication in communicating through memes is very high. It's a great source of humor and sophisticated comment. So that's a good way of talking to your kids.
and do they get their news through like TikTok or short form video grabs, or how?
I think that's a really big question. I think they're surrounded by it, and certainly with my youngest, he goes down rabbit holes of the algorithm.
Right.
And so I think that's a real challenge, because you need a good news brand to still stand for something. I think audiences are getting much better at understanding and reading the language of news media through social media. They're more skeptical, more cynical, especially as AI generated video becomes more.
Well, it's very
alluring.
relevant, because yesterday I wrote the story I wrote yesterday, which is for Memorandum 7, is called The Liar's Dividend. So have you heard of the liar's dividend, Claudia?
No, I don't know it.
The liar's dividend is a subtle but powerful byproduct of the misinformation age. The term describes a perverse advantage. Once the public knows that convincing fake content exists, bad actors can dismiss real evidence as fake. Right? So there's a real video, and the liar's dividend is that they can say, well, that's fake. That's a fake video.
It's
That's fake
widely contended that that's the Russian modus operandi, is you put so much stuff out there that the end result is people don't trust anything, rather than knowing the difference between right and wrong.
The funny thing about that story is that the recent example was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was reported to have been killed, and his proof of life video that he filmed in a cafe had him holding up his hand saying, look, 5 fingers, because the AI often creates 6-finger version of the. So that's the new tell. That's the new tell that it's a real thing.
Sometimes when you're trying to, given the brief of appealing to a younger audience, it can fail dismally. I think we remember the Vegemite Eye Snack 2.0 from 2009, the 50,000 entries, and they picked that one.
Yeah.
And it was such a failure.
Well, the other thing too, which we have to acknowledge, is that some forms of media die, and certainly the business model for traditional media is really challenged. But there's no shortage of people who want good stories, and there's no shortage of people who are interested in deep analysis. So I think, it's a really interesting question of what are the new ways of giving those to people. And we don't need to assume that there's just some dominant, credible players. Maybe the new landscape is very different to that. But I love the fact that, iSnack 2.0 or whatever it was, is you could tell from the beginning that the wrong people were making the choice about what would work.
There was it Boaty McBoatface? That was
Bodie, Buddy McBoatface. It was around the same time.
Yeah.
So
Um,
clever.
yeah, that's interesting about some media dying, because I mean, I can't imagine newspapers surviving, really, like printed newspapers. But books, on the other hand, and I'm very biased here because my business model is like print centric. I can imagine those books kept in the shade, away from the sun,
Yeah.
can be around in 100 years for people to read about the Liar's Dividend.
I think that's also something about the new luxury. And Claudia, I'd love your thoughts on this. But with the proliferation of easy digital generation, the physical and the analog become what people crave. And so things you can touch and feel, not just a luxury item, but they're something with long-standing credibility. The economics are very different than they used to be, but there's still something about physicality which is a reflection of humanity. And my contention is we shouldn't be trying to get 100% efficiency through our work. We should be doing work which is human and which we enjoy doing together. And so, Claudia, I'd love your thoughts on physicality.
Interesting thing about physicality these days is often that aspirational, wonderful thing that we desire, we have seen digitally. So we can't touch and feel it, yet we desire it because it's presented to us in such a way that is so desirable that we want a piece of the action. So what do? We purchase it, and then we can touch and feel it. So it's a reverse of the way we used to shop. If we're taking things home, we used to see the object, touch it, feel it, try it on. What an experience trying a piece of clothing on. Now this is the ideal, this is the feel of it, buy it to feel it.
There's the souvenir instinct as well. I don't know if it applies so much to novels. Like I know Melanie reads through her phone and the Kindle now, and I don't know if she's out there like buying too many paperbacks, right? Because once you've read it, I'm not sure it has that much value as a souvenir, as opposed to a picture book or whatever.
It's so interesting. On my Instagram, I've been posting some book jackets from my mum's collection because my mum has gone into aged care, and so we're working through her large number of items in the home. Books are heavy, books are hard to move, but she had a couple of shelves of paperbacks from the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they're just glorious designs. All the pages are brown and very aged, but the covers are just fantastic. And it's so nice to see the craft in those. The other interesting thing too about books is the Australian book industry tends to go first to paperbacks because of the economics of our country. And working at Harvard Business Review, the first book was always a case-bound hardcover, and so they're a lot more keepable in that sense. A hardcover, well-bound book definitely has more of a souvenir value.
Yes, I mean that's the tradition, isn't it?
You do the boxed edition with gilded pages, and it comes in its own presentation box. You've got leather cover,
with an ex libris.
James, you read my mind, and in fact, that's coming. Thank you for that. That's probably a good place to leave our conversation because that is coming in October. The Shindig. I noticed you registered for the Shindig.
You betcha.
Yesterday. We're nudging 100 registrations already. That's not too bad for 7 months out from an event. So I'm pleased with that. And most people are hanging around for the meal. So Roche, the Sri Lankan chef, will be happy, and I'm going to pop up there tonight for a goat curry and let him know what's heading his way.
It'll be vats of goat curry.
So thanks for your time, James, and thank you, Claudia, for joining us. And my head looks a little low now, so I'm going to have to do all sorts of adjusting in the editing process. Folks, Memorandum 6 is coming in May. Please get online, get up to date, subscribe, and you've got something to say too, probably, Claudia.
I always have something to say at the end, Remo. And, if you're reading Memorandum or you're looking at the stories online and going, this is fantastic, I've got a great idea, do get in touch, remorandum.com.
The liar's dividend was Melanie's idea. She told it to me yesterday on our promenade walk. And by the end of the day, it was in her inbox. So
There you
that's...
go.
Be like Melanie, come through with those ideas.
Okay, bye, you too.
See you later.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.